Hello! Welcome to another episode of Torn Book Club. The chat is already going. Everybody was listening to a little track from the Hobbit soundtrack. This was Ironfoot, which was obviously the theme to Dane Ironfoot and the Dwarf Armies, which I think is probably one of the better tracks to come off of this soundtrack. I hope you all enjoyed that. Everybody's been talking about their favorite pieces of music from the trilogy. I think Ava said that she really enjoyed Desolation of Smaug. And some people were talking about, I think Simply Smaug was talking about the music from Smaug's attack on Lake Town. And now we're talking about who has what soundtracks. I have them all. Me personally, I have them all. I'm a big soundtrack junkie. So today is our final installment of our reviews particularly I should say my review of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. And I'm hoping everybody who is watching this has seen the movie, because we are going to get into heavy spoiler territory here. Beyond just what's in the book, but also the original stuff that's also in the movie. Temple is saying, I always feel like I have to rewatch it again and again and again. I know the feeling. I've seen it 3 times already. Last week I had only seen it once. I've seen it twice since then, and really sort of put my scrutinous eye to it. And I've been pouring through all of my various Tolkien research material, like the letters, the annotated Hobbit, the Tolkien Illustrated Encyclopedia. What else have I got here? I have got a bunch of volumes from the History of Middle-earth. What we have here is volumes 1 and 2 of the Book of Lost Tales, and then we skip all the way ahead to the War of the Ring, then Sauron Defeated, then the last volume, The Peoples of Middle-earth. Ravander is saying, it seems my parents' television is too loud for me to hear what is being said. Oh, dang. Well, there will always be the archive that you can watch later. So before we get too much into the big spoilery review stuff, because there's going to be a lot, and we're probably going to go over time, but that's what these big review episodes are for. I would like to, of course, do our regular business, which is our book of the month is The Martian by Andy Weir. Hope some of you have been reading this. We'll be talking about it next week. And, of course, there is also the ticket and fundraiser for The One Last Party, our final party in Los Angeles for all of us wonderful fans that we've been doing since The Lord of the Rings, really. And this is our last one. It's not technically an Oscar party like we've done before. This is more a celebration of all 6 movies, and of course all of the fans who we love dearly in this wonderful community that we have that we've built over the last 17 years. So you can go to Indiegogo and purchase tickets there, or if you can't come to the party, you can still find ways to support it, which I highly recommend doing. If you just go to Indiegogo and search for The One Last Party, you'll find it pretty easily. So please go. The sales end on December 31st. So the end of the month is your last chance. So that's it for the regular business. Sort of sped through it quickly because we have a lot to talk about with this. Where the heck is it? Is it here? There it is. Our movie review of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. And this is more than just a review of The Battle of the Five Armies. I'm going to be talking about the trilogy as a whole and what worked, what didn't work, what I liked, what I didn't like, what we all may have liked, what we all may have not liked, and also doing some deconstruction and trying to clarify some stuff that may be a little muddied in how it was depicted in the movie. Which is why I have all these books to pour through. So, first of all, let me put up a little bit of a disclaimer that these are my opinions of the movie, and they do not reflect the opinions of theonering.net as a whole, quite frankly, because there is no single opinion from the One Ring. There have been many discussions and many arguments over how we like the movie. I sort of fall into that mid-range where there are parts that I liked, there are parts that I didn't like. But to what is Aravandi saying is the only thing I really didn't like about Battle of the Five Armies was the manner in which Fili and Kili died. Loved everything else. That's a good point. I thought Fili's death had the right gravitas to it. Kili was muddied by stuff, but we'll get into that. So the big question that I've been asking myself over the last week is the ultimate question. Does The Hobbit work as a trilogy now that we've seen all three parts, aside from probably what I'm estimating will be about 25 or 30 minutes of extra material for the extended edition. Ultimately, but now we've seen the main bulk of it. So does The Hobbit work as a trilogy? And I have to say, no, it doesn't. And here's why. It takes too much of the focus away from the title character. All these additions and all these other plot threads and all these different storylines and trying to make this whole conflict much bigger than it really was sort of takes away from the core focus of the story, which is of Bilbo Baggins being this very simple hobbit who is thrust out of his very common life and into this very wide world that he is not prepared for, that is large and scary, and it's his adventures through it, and it's his perspective of all this stuff. And so when we have all this other stuff that was added in to expand this into a trilogy, what we have is really a lack of focus. And I think that the lack of focus really was detrimental to this. It's supposed to be a movie about Bilbo, and I mean, Bilbo is in it, and he's great. Martin Freeman was absolutely perfect casting, but the focus is drawn away from Bilbo so much that it really does sort of it sort of muddies the whole thing. It dilutes the whole story into something else. And I would have been okay with these additions if they were in service to a greater story, if all of this were to tie into the Lord of the Rings. But ultimately, a lot of it doesn't. And that's what I found so disappointing. Like, for instance, everything with Tauriel. I was really hoping that where we were going with Tauriel would be something tying Legolas to a much greater story, or to his own arc that would span the years and sort of make it sort of bridge the Legolas that we see in this, who is very stoic, to the much more earthy, much more expansive Legolas that we see in Lord of the Rings. And I thought that that's what Tauriel was going to help to do, and she really doesn't. Legolas sort of gets to that point all on his own. Um, Aravandi says, I really feel like even though Martin Freeman didn't get the most screen time, he's still so good an actor that he stands out. And I absolutely agree with that. And I think all the performances in this were very good. And I have no problem with them whatsoever. I thought Martin Freeman was fantastic. I thought Richard Armitage was far and away one of the best performances I've seen in any Middle Earth movie. He's up there with Andy Serkis as a Gollum. So I didn't have a problem with any of the performances, and in fact I loved the performances. I even liked Evangeline Lilly's performance as Tauriel. Um, as weird and as out of place as Tauriel ultimately was, I thought that Evangeline Lilly did a very good job portraying her. Simply Smaug is saying, you even thought Alfred was great. I thought the performance was good. I thought Alfred as a character was useless. I thought that, well, Alfred, let's talk about Alfred real quick. I thought his arc in the beginning of the Battle of the Five Armies was played out very early on, after the scene where the mob tries to lynch him and Bard stops them. His arc is pretty much over. We can move on, but he keeps coming back, and he keeps coming back and doing the same comic relief shtick over and over again, and it ultimately goes nowhere. It ultimately just ends with him leaving. There was no arc to it. There was no resolution to it. And really too much screen time was dedicated to this comic relief guy who does nothing. And that's not to say I don't want to disparage Ryan Gage. I thought he did a fantastic performance, and as Alfred, I just thought the character was unnecessary, or at least unnecessary for the amount of time that he was in this movie. Like, Aravandi says, personally, I appreciated the Alfred funny moments, especially after Keely and Feely's deaths, because it helped from being really bummed out. Yeah, I didn't have a problem, or I wasn't bummed out by Keely and Feely's deaths. Ava is saying, I hated the troll scene with Bard's children. Agreed there. The troll scene, first of all, the troll in that scene looked like the mountain troll from the first Harry Potter movie. He looked so doofy. And it was really sort of a callback to Legolas shield surfing in the Two Towers. And ultimately didn't do anything. Part of me was wanted to yell at the kids, well, get out of there already, because there was plenty of areas for them to run to when the troll arrived. They weren't cornered, and yet they just stood there screaming. And I always have a problem when we have situations like that, because it's so forced and it's so dumb. Ustreamer 57731 was talking about Richard Armitage's performance, saying it was staggeringly good. He played it so dark and tortured, and then heroic after all, nailed it. And I agree with you 100%. Richard Armitage was fantastic. He stood apart from just about everybody else. Throughout this whole movie, I utterly loved his performance throughout this whole movie, and one scene in particular, which I really give credit to both him and Graham McTavish for this. It's a scene between Thorin and Dwalin in the throne room, and it's not a scene that's in the books, but it's Dwalin trying to point out to Thorin just how far he's fallen. And the way the two of them play that scene, like, if you were just to take away the performances and look at the and look at the words of that scene, it plays out very generically. The writing of that scene is basically you're not strong. I am strong. You're you've changed. Well, I'm still king. And but the way they deliver it to each other, there's so much gravity and there's so much pain in their performances. Like Graham McTavish as Dwalin is utterly brokenhearted, having to tell Thorin all this stuff, and Thorin, and this is what I loved about Richard Armitage's performance, was that he seemed almost aware that he was losing control, so that when he says to Dwalin, "Get out, or I'll before I kill you," that the delivery of that didn't feel so much like a threat as it did a warning, like, of him saying, like, "I'm starting to lose control and I don't know if I can stop myself, so you better get out of here." And it was absolutely a beautiful scene, and I thought that performance, that scene alone, and again, like, this is why I've heard a lot of people say I liked everything that was from the book and hated everything that was not from the book. I sort of feel like there's some wiggle room there, because this scene was not in the book, but it's a phenomenal scene. And those are the things that I don't have a problem with. Those are the things that I feel add to it. But ultimately, I feel like the main focus of this trilogy should have been on Bilbo and on Thorin. Because when the two of them are the primary focus of this story. And when you start muddying the waters with Dol Guldur, when you start muddying the waters with Tauriel, with Azog, with Bolg, even with Smaug's weird connection with Sauron that is never really explained. It takes away from what the focus of this story should be. And we can argue back and forth whether or not it was actually Peter Jackson's decision to make it a trilogy, or if it was mandated by the studio. And really, only the people who were involved in those discussions know the truth. And I don't like to speculate on that. But I always felt that the original plan to make this 2 movies and have the main bulk of The Hobbit be in the first movie, and then have the second movie be more of a bridge between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I thought that was a much more solid plan. And I was very disappointed when they announced that it was going to be a trilogy, because I knew that something like this was going to happen. And I was really hoping that it wouldn't. I was hoping that between Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Guillermo del Toro, that they would be able to put together something that would be a good self-contained trilogy. And ultimately, it's not. I didn't feel that it was that it worked well as a trilogy. It made this story so much bigger than it needed to be. Now, some people were talking about Dol Guldur in the chat, and Galadriel in particular. Now, this is... it seems like I'm probably going to fall on the side against what some people are saying in the chat. I did not like Galadriel in this. For the scene where she banishes Sauron, she kind of looked like something out of a Japanese horror film. And I felt that it was over the top, and it was clearly a callback to her scene from Fellowship where she freaks out over the ring. And this is another thing where I think I fall on the side. I fall on a side that doesn't really agree with most other people. I didn't like that scene either. I didn't like this scene in Fellowship where she flips out over the ring, because I felt that it changed the it it changed the point of that scene, because what it showed was Galadriel actually losing control. And my interpretation of that scene, and again, this is just my interpretation of it, was that she was attempting to show Frodo the error of offering her the ring. And so, I mean, she does put on a good show for him, but ultimately she's still in control. And so seeing that bit at the end where she clearly has lost control and is like trying to gather herself together again, I felt wasn't in line with my interpretation of that scene. And it sort of, I won't say it ruined it for me, but it did sort of take me out a bit because it seemed a little off. And so to see that again in this movie, only now turned up to 11, really, really took me out of that scene. I didn't care for it. And I was really hoping for something different with Galadriel. I was hoping for like a glorious warrior moment or something like that, but instead we got this J horror version of Galadriel, which I didn't care for. Now in the chat, everybody's been talking about Bilbo crying over Thorin's body, and again, this is a whole this goes back to my point about the stellar performances by Martin Freeman and Richard Armitage, and the scene where Bilbo is crying over Thorin's body. That whole death scene, that whole death scene of with Thorin is just so fantastic, and the way they both play it is so good, with Martin Freeman and Bilbo basically like trying to say, no, you're gonna make it, it's gonna be fine, and then sort of in denial when Thorin breathes his last breath, and then seeing him break down again. It's a beautiful scene, and it's a beautiful performance. There's so much good in this, but there is so much that detracts from that. That I feel that ultimately this doesn't work, which is a real shame, because like I said, there's so much in this to like, and not just this movie, but in all three movies. There's a lot to like in these movies. But what is likable in these movies ultimately amounts to maybe a 3 or 4 hour movie, not a 9-hour trilogy. Now, Simply Smug is saying, I was so strong until that point and bald. That was where I started to lose it myself. I can't honestly say that I cried at the end of this as much as I did Return of the King, because basically with Return of the King, I start losing it around the point where Aragorn says, "You bow to no one," so that by the time we get to the Grey Havens, I am a mess, and it happens every time. Doesn't matter how many times I see the movie. With this, I got some tears in my eyes during the death scene, and some when Bilbo says goodbye to the dwarves, to the company. Jan is saying, I actually liked most of the battles CGI in the movie, and I was expecting the exact opposite. Yeah, the battles looked good. They were fine. I mean, aside from the doofy looking trolls, which I didn't like. Most of it is actually very well done. I like the way they handle the army formations. I love the shield wall that the dwarves put up. I thought the moment of the elves leaping over the dwarves to attack the orcs was a fantastic shot. I loved like how in sync the elves are as an army. For instance, how they all move out of the way as Thranduil and Bard are walking through to get to the front of the gates of Erebor. But and I loved how they all turn in sync, how they all knock their bows in sync and all disarm in sync. It's a very intimidating army, and I love that about the elves. Um, and some people are talking about the troll that headbutts the wall. That was that was an interesting use of a battering ram, I have to say. It was very creative. What they're talking about is a scene where a troll basically has this huge helmet on that's made of concrete, and it rams head first into one of the walls of Dale, shatters the wall, and then the troll basically wobbles around a bit and then falls over unconscious. And I thought that was a nice funny moment. Um, uh, but yeah, I thought that was an okay moment. But again, it's like the trolls were kind of goofy. Um, and speaking of goofy, Ava is saying that Dane on the War Pig looked goofy. I don't utterly disagree with that, but I don't completely agree either. I thought that I thought that Billy Connolly as Dane did a fantastic job. Um, I did think that some of the shots of him from afar when he's on the war pig, or they're calling him Boris the War Boar. That's a mouthful right there. um, I thought that I thought that he was good. I really liked Billy Connolly's performance. I loved how he's in the thick of it, and he's basically just headbutting orcs and treating it like it's no big deal. Like, okay, so this is happening. Where's Thorin, by the way? I had no problem with Billy Connolly. I Some of the more distant shots of him, they do look a little awkward. I will definitely agree with you there, Ava. I should also point out, totally unrelated to this. Earlier today, Ava posted a beautiful picture for the book club up on our wall on Facebook. Um, so if you can, go to our Facebook page and check it out. It's an absolutely beautiful image that she put together, and really, Ava, thank you for that. It's gorgeous. Um, I'm going to try to repost it a little bit just so that everybody can see it. It really is a beautiful picture. Um, I didn't have time to make a graphic of it to put up on the show, unfortunately. So you'll just have to go to our Facebook page or to our Twitter to see it. Um, but Temple is saying, my mom didn't like the moment when Thorin and Dane had their conversation in the middle of the battlefield. She thought it was unrealistic. It kind of is, but you see, that's what I liked about that moment, because the dwarves are so battle hardened that basically, even when they're in the middle of what is clearly a losing battle, they're still just not treating it like it's a big deal. And I kind of like that. It's sort like it feels almost Scottish. Like if you watch like Braveheart or something like that, like how they're very nonchalant about war and battle and fighting people to the death. And it's a very dwarvish thing, and I liked it. I liked that touch. Um, so one of the things that I've been looking at other reviews. What is Ustreamer? What is Ustreamers? Stop this, you stupid chat. Well, one of the Ustreamers was asking what I think we should like, what exactly we would like to see in an extended edition of this. Well, for one, we've been told that there will be more Beorn in the extended edition, so I'm glad for that. Um, I really hope that they will put in Thorin's funeral, because I felt just from the way that was edited, it was very clear that they had shot the funeral scene, but it didn't make it into this cut. So hopefully we will see that in the extended edition. Probably a little bit more between Gandalf and Radagast, like how Gandalf ends up with Radagast's staff, because the way it plays out in the movie, Radagast takes Gandalf to his home, and Gandalf is immediately, "Get me a horse. I need to get to Dale. I need to warn them." And so I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Temple is saying, "I felt like it didn't make sense that Tariel felt so strongly about Keeley at the end, though I know a lot of people wouldn't care for it. It would be nice to see more clarification of why she would end up feeling that strongly." I agree with that, Temple. I sort of felt like the way she felt for Keeley, for one thing, seemed unwarranted. It seemed like it sort of came out of nowhere, especially considering she's this very strong character, and one of the first things that Keeley says to her is a cheesy pickup line, which I absolutely hated. That's like probably my least favorite moment in the entire trilogy, and maybe all three, or maybe all six Middle-earth films altogether. I thought that was an awful moment where he gives her this really awful, really cheesy pickup line. But yeah, I never felt that that her feelings for Keeley... I understood Keeley's feelings for Tauriel. That kind of made sense, because he was entranced by her. But I sort of felt like Tauriel returning those feelings didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Temple is saying, "I also felt like my sense of time was thrown. I wasn't always sure about how much time had passed between what we were shown on screen." And that's a good point. I really don't know. There really is you sort of do lose your sense of timing in this. And Ava is talking about like how she'd like more dialogue between Tauriel and Legolas, sort of explaining this whole situation. And I don't disagree. The problem is I don't feel like there is much that can be done with this subplot that really changes just how awkward and forced it is, because it doesn't play into anything bigger. And that was really what I was hoping would happen in this movie, is that we would see this whole romance between Keeley and Tauriel and Legolas, and that whole weird love triangle, if it would somehow play into Legolas's own transformation, or his own character growth. But we don't see that. Instead, what we see is, after the battle, Legolas just says, "I'm not going back to Mirkwood." And Thranduil is surprisingly okay with that, which I found a little weird, considering how isolationist he is. And I never got the sense that anything expanded his perspective either. So when Legolas says to him, I'm not going back to Mirkwood," Thranduil is like, "Oh, okay, well, if that's the case, then go north and find Aragorn." And I just I don't like that. It felt too forced, and that was my problem with that whole scene, was that it felt very forced, and it felt like they were trying to shoehorn in another reference to the Fellowship, which I didn't like in Desolation, the way they shoehorned in Gimli with that little portrait that Glowin carrying around. Of course he would, but then to like have that moment where Legolas singles out that portrait simply so that Glowing can call him by name and say, "That's my wee boy, Gimli." Like, I I didn't really like that. I don't like when they try to force those references in there. Um, like that. I never like when this is one of the prequel hang-ups that I have, is that they always try to force some reference to the original into the prequels. Like they did it tons of times in Star Wars. Um, they didn't do it as much in The Hobbit, and I mean, okay, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here because I absolutely loved the final scene of the Battle of the Five Armies, but that's because it was a very subtle. It was a very subtle way of sort of bringing this whole thing full circle. Um, um, with Bilbo holding the ring in his study, just sort of his mind wandering, and then he hears a knock on the door, and he launches into, "No, thank you. We'll have no more visitors, well wishes, or distant relations." And then you realize that this is the scene from Fellowship when Gandalf knocks on the door of Bag End right before the birthday party. And it's this really nice way of bringing it full circle that isn't like as in your face as like, "That's my wee boy Gimli," or "You should find Arathorn. You should find the son of Arathorn. He goes by the name Strider. His real name you'll have to discover for yourself." Um, Jan is saying one of my favorite scenes was Bilbo saying goodbye to the dwarves, and yes, I absolutely agree with that. That's a beautiful scene, and again, it's a credit to Martin Freeman's performance, the way he does that. And Ava is saying Gandalf's last line was perfection, and I'm assuming you mean the last line Ian McKellen speaks as Gandalf to Bilbo at the edge of the Shire, um, and that's a great line. And it sort of speaks to the theme of The Hobbit, which I sort of feel like I sort of felt like the the theme of the Hobbit is best encapsulated in that line, that last line to Gandalf, which I can find here in the book. I just need to get to it. Where is it? Last stage, last chapter. It practically is the last line of the book. Yes. Okay. "You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all." Um, and that's a fantastic line. Um, and it's sort of like the central theme of The Hobbit is Bilbo is this tiny little person in a wide world after all. He's gone through this huge adventure that is so much bigger than him. And it doesn't need to be this big apocalyptic battle between the forces of good and evil. This is still a big battle for him because he's talking to a dragon. He's thrust into the middle of this big battle of everybody trying to lay a claim on Erebor. Um, and that's really big stuff for a hobbit from the Shire. It doesn't need to be bigger than that. Temple is saying, "I really feel like if they took the dwarves and Bilbo fighting Smaug in the mountain..." Oh god, everybody's chatting so much. It's hard for me to scroll up on the chat to see what I missed, so I apologize for that. What is this here? Jan is saying one of the scenes that sort of sums up The Hobbit for me is Martin's speech in Unexpected Journey when he takes off the ring in front of the mountain. That's a really good scene, and that's a really good speech. And yeah, And but again, it speaks to like this battle from this is this quest from Bilbo's perspective, which is you've lost your home. I have a home, and I'm going to help you find yours, if I can. And it's a fantastic speech. But again, it doesn't need to. It it's still a very simple story. It doesn't need to be this big battle between good and evil, which is kind of what we ultimately end up having. Um, Now, I think Temple is talking about the death of Smaug and how it should have been at the end of the second movie and not the beginning of the third movie. And I completely agree with you there. Simply because it really is only about 10-15 minutes long, start to finish. And if you put that at the end of Desolation of Smaug, you give the movie a proper climax rather than this cliffhanger that we got instead. Um, Simply Smaug is saying Peter Jackson made Smaug out to be a bit of a buffoon. I don't know if I agree with that too much. I feel like Smaug is very egotistical, and that's how he was in the book. Smaug is a very egotistical kind of character. Why he would stop and start taunting Bard of all people was a bit too much. And really, that was just, I sort of feel like that was only there in order to have Benedict Cumberbatch have a credit in this movie, because there was no reason for Smaug to turn and sort of give this very taunting speech to Bard. And now somebody asked about the last song, or Billy Boyd's song, The Last Goodbye. Loved it. Thought it was a beautiful, perfect wrap up to this. Billy Boyd was fantastic. It's a beautiful song. I've listened to it like about 1,000 times already since I got the soundtrack. Like, it really is like probably one of my favorites, next to Into the West and May It Be. So they're talking about Bard using Bane as a makeshift wind lance to launch the Black Arrow. And Aravandi is saying, I sort of think the feathers at the end of the arrow might have taken his face off in reality. I sort of felt the same way. Like, it was a neat idea. And I thought, like, you had like this really good moment between Bard and Bane where Bard says to him, just look at me. Ignore the dragon behind you. Just focus on me. And I thought that was a really nice moment. But then when he launches the arrow, yeah, I sort of feel like it probably would have done some damage to Bane's face and shoulder. Ustreamer 1110 says, I think the simple Hobbit story works well as a standalone treatment. I think if you were going to treat it as a set with the Lord of the Rings, which would be hard not to, you have to show the grand tapestry of Sauron's move against Middle-earth. I sort of agree with that. I'm not saying that the stuff at Dol Guldur should be completely ignored, but again, this is back to my point that none of that really ties together with the bigger story in the end. And it does sort of feel like a distraction. I mean, they tried to tie it together with Sauron saying that he was going to rebuild Angmar, and then Legolas and Tauriel realizing that there are orcs again in Angmar, and that they are coming to to take the Lonely Mountain as a strategic point. But again, that's all sort of muddied. We don't really get a good sense of what exactly the point of all that is. Like, why is Sauron trying to rebuild Angmar? Why are there orcs in Mount Gundabad? Why does this matter? Why is Sauron trying to rebuild Angmar rather than Mordor? Because and I ask this not because I don't know, but because a lot of people who have, even those who have read The Hobbit, were sort of like, wait, what is this Angmar and Gundabad stuff? And why, how does this play into everything else that we're seeing? Suddenly, the Lonely Mountain is this strategic point to Angmar. But isn't Sauron rebuilding in Mordor? So I did some research, trying to see what exactly Angmar and Gundabad are. So quickly, in the book, it does mention that the goblins from the Misty Mountains, who come to the Lonely Mountain after Thorin, they actually did stop in Gundabad to get reinforcements. Because Gundabad is a mountain that was it was an orc stronghold in the kingdom of Angmar. And Angmar was established by the leader of the Nazgul, hence the name the Witch King of Angmar. And it was set up for the specific purpose, he was sent there by Sauron to establish this kingdom for the specific purpose of taking out the Dunedain, the last descendants of Numenor, the men, who were basically the biggest threat to Sauron. And there were many battles between them, and ultimately the Dunedain were decimated, but the dwarves and the elves came together, and they were able to drive the Witch King back into Mordor, and Angmar fell. That's what Angmar is. Why that needs to be reestablished is a very interesting question. Ava is saying, I took my dad to see Battle of the Five Armies. I don't think he had any clue what was happening during the Dol Guldur scene. Yeah, it's I can understand that because, and this is another one of my big criticisms of this, is that a lot of the fight scenes feel like something out of a video game. And that's sort of how it felt like throughout the entire trilogy. The battles with the goblins in the Misty Mountains. The stuff with Smaug in the Lonely Mountain. The dwarves fighting Smaug. That felt like a video game. Most of the one-on-one battles, most of the one-on-one fights, particularly those between Legolas and Bolg and Thorin and Azog, they all felt like something out of a video game. And it was very jarring to me. It didn't really have the same realism that we saw in The Lord of the Rings. Maybe not in all cases, but I'm thinking of one fight in particular, which is the fight between Aragorn and Lurtz at the end of Fellowship. I thought that fight scene was so exceptionally well done, and every other fight scene has sort of paled in comparison to that. Ustreamer 1110 says, doesn't that kind of tie to Aragorn being a king in exile and hiding? Won't that highlight Aragorn's character arc and backstory of being raised in Rivendell? And yeah, that's a really good point. And that was another. You're talking about Angmar. That was another point that I wanted to bring up, and it's not something that we see in the movie at all. Is that okay? If they're going to reestablish Angmar, then they have to talk about that this is specifically to go after the Dunedain again, in order to take out the last heir of Isildur, which again is the only major threat to Sauron returning to power. And Sauron knows this. And so when you have that, what you have there is you have something that does tie into the bigger story of the Lord of the Rings, while also not distracting too much from the story of the Hobbit, but then it also creates this real reason for why people are going after why the orcs are going after the Lonely Mountain. But we don't get that. Instead, we get sort of like a throwaway line from Thranduil at the very end. So there's really nothing that ties Dol Guldur or Angmar to the bigger story, even though it's right there. Which is a real shame, because it wouldn't have taken that much. And maybe there will be something in the extended editions that does tie it to them. I kind of hope so. So everybody's talking about Galadriel again. And her moment. Temple saying it showed she is powerful, but it also showed that it takes a lot of energy for her to do something like that, which is why she's so weak afterwards. And yeah, I still don't like it, just because it makes her look almost evil, and I wanted her to be like this glorious warrior, and instead she looks like a swamp queen or something. And I just didn't like the visual of that. Ustreamer4434 says elves did not have that kind of power in the lore. If anyone would have it, it would be the Astari. I sort of feel like that could be the case, but usually it is. But I sort of feel like maybe you have a little bit of an out there with Galadriel being the keeper of one of the 3 elven rings. Again, I don't know if that's enough. Aravandi says, some of the elves in the lore are very powerful, though Galadriel did play a big part in destroying Dol Guldur once and for all after the War of the Ring. Well, that's I mean, Galadriel has always been depicted as extremely powerful. But also with her destroying Dol Guldur after the War of the Ring, it's sort of like, well, there isn't a threat there anymore. So it's really more just taking down a fortress, an empty fortress. So there wasn't really much more of a threat in Dol Guldur at that point. Because Sauron is gone, the Nazgul are gone. And Ustreamer4434 is saying, but she was not a Maiar. Gandalf is. The Elven Rings did not have any sort of power like that. They gave the power to endure and preserve. That's a very good point. And now Ustreamer1110 is saying, Galadriel is the niece of Fëanor and Fingolfin. One fought several Balrogs, and one meleeed Morgoth and wounded him numerous times. The Astari are lessened in their human guise. And we can sort of like get into like some very lore lore interpretation with that, and it's certainly, I would say, if it were plausible for any elf to have that kind of power, Galadriel is the one. Uh, so Ustreamer4434 says, but note that anyone that ever fought a Balrog also died in the attempt. That I almost want to say that's not true with Gandalf, but the truth is he did die and then was resurrected. So, because Balrogs themselves are Maiar, they're on the same level of as the wizards. Um, and but we're getting distracted with that discussion, and there's a lot of back and forth that can happen with that. Um, Whether or not Galadriel actually had the power to do what she did is debatable. I would say that if it were, I still stand by that if it were at least plausible for any elf to have that kind of ability, Galadriel would be the one it would be most plausible for. Um, Now, a while ago, Suzanne joked, Josh is looking for references to wereworms in all these books, and it's true, I did, and you know what? I found them. Let me get it here. Uh, uh, yeah. So there, a lot of people were sort of joking about like, are wereworms really a thing, or was that just some weird thing that Tolkien made up, or that Peter Jackson made up for the movie? The truth is that wereworms are a thing. They were in here. I just need to find them again. Yeah, here we go. Where are they? There was... I really should have put a bookmark in here. Here we go. Yes. Wereworms. In the tales of the Hobbit folk, there lived in the last desert in the east of Middle-earth a race that was named the Wereworms. Though no tale of the Third Age of the Sun tells of these beings, the wereworms were likened to dragons and serpents. To hobbits, they were perhaps but memories of those creatures that stalked the earth during the wars of Beleriand. So, wereworms did exist. They were probably more... they're more considered mythological, and we do see that in the movie, with Azog saying they've forgotten about the wereworms, why they needed them in the first place seemed kind of unnecessary, because the army was so big that that they didn't really need to like tunnel underground and make a sneak attack, because they had a big enough army on their own. So yes, wereworms are a thing from the lore. It's in there. It's not something that Peter Jackson created in a vacuum. That, however, does not stop all the Dune jokes that all my friends made, and that I made too. Some people were joking about like, why didn't we see Legolas attack one of the wereworms the same way he did the Oliphant in Return of the King, and then we could have have a big worm rider dune scene in The Hobbit. Kind of glad that didn't happen. But the other question that I feel a lot of people were asking, and especially in this movie, is what exactly are the Five Armies? This is the Battle of the Five Armies, but everything always sort of gets a little more nebulous when you get to the Fifth Army. Like you have Temple saying, "Oh, Doom, maybe Legolas's eyes could be even more crazy blue from the spice." That's a good one, Temple. I like that. And Simply Smug is saying, yes, instead he flew on a bat. And that was another scene that I didn't like because if you watch Peter Jackson's King Kong, you'll see Adrian Brody pulls that exact move in that movie. And so it was pretty much Peter Jackson stealing from himself or calling back to himself in a completely different moment. Or in a completely different movie. So back to the Five Armies. So the four of the Five Armies are easy to identify: men, elves, dwarves, and orcs. Then things get a little muddier when we try to figure out what that fifth army is. In the book, in the way Tolkien wrote it, it was the Fifth Army were wolves that came with that fought on the side of the orcs. And that's Tolkien's depiction of it, which is of course the proper Fifth Army. So it was men, elves, dwarves, goblins, and wolves, or later on orcs and wargs. But then in the Rankin Bass movie, the Fifth Army changed from being the wolves to being the eagles. Not really sure why that change was made, but it was. And then in this, there are no wolves or wargs in the battle, so they're not even an army there. But instead, we have essentially two orc armies. There's the Moria orcs that were led by Azog, and the Gundabad orcs that are led by Bolg. Those could be considered two separate armies, I suppose, because they are two different races of orcs coming from two different strongholds. Or you could consider the eagles one of the armies, even though they come in at the last minute. You could consider the bats one of the armies. So the Fifth Army, again, sort of gets muddied a little bit. But the way I look at it is the five armies are men, elves, dwarves, and two armies of orcs. That's totally open to interpretation. So everybody now is talking about Dane and how he just takes charge when the orcs show up. And yeah, that was a fantastic bit. And again, it shows the power of Dane. It shows like just how in charge he is, and how wonderful Billy Connolly was in that role for as little as he was in it. So he shows up and immediately just takes charge. He's got the men of Lake Town like ready to turn tail and run just from yelling at them. Yes, Jan is saying Dane's first line is like, "Good morning, how are we?" It's something like that, and it's a great way to start off, because like I really like Dane, and I liked how he doesn't hesitate for 1 second to refocus his army to the orcs as soon as they show up. And I mean, we get a lot more hesitation from Thranduil, um, which I think also plays into that really cool moment where the elves leap over the dwarves to take on the orcs. Ava's saying, "I loved how Dane called Thranduil a sprite." Yeah, that was a great line, and what I loved was like how insulted Thranduil looked at him saying that, and that was a great moment. Again, there was nothing I disliked about Dane. I thought that Billy Connolly did a great job. I thought he was a fantastic character. I thought it was a great performance. I thought the makeup was really cool too. How he had his beard sort of shaped into tusks. I thought that was really cool. And I've seen some reviews where the reviewer just sort of assumed that everything about Dane was CG, which so not the case. That was a real guy. That was really Billy Connolly in makeup, just looking awesome. So, and I don't know if that's a testament to how good the makeup was, that it looks so unreal that it had to be CG. I don't know, but I thought he looked great. I thought Aravandi says he had tusks to match the tusks on Boris the War Boar. Yes. Now, is that official? Is that his official name, Boris the War Boar? Or is that just something that was made up? And Aravandi says, my aunt was wondering if he was all CGI too. But no, he wasn't. Were some of the more long distance shots of him CG? Probably. But the close-up stuff, that's all Billy Connolly. There's no denying that. Aravandi says, I made up his name. Well, guess what? It's official now. We are now calling him Boris the War Boar. So let's get started on making that trend on Twitter and Facebook somehow, somewhere. Boris the War Boar. Suzanne, if you're listening, go to it with the buttons. What is this? Simply Smaug is saying there needed to be a conversation with Gwai here. We needed to see Eagles shot down. Once again, the Eagles just saved the day. It would have been nice to see something like that, but again, there was very little. They established very early on that the Eagles don't speak in the movies. With Gwai here in Fellowship of the Ring. We don't. So I like that they at least stayed consistent with that. It would have been weird if the Eagles started talking now, even though they do in the books. But at least that stayed consistent. Like it or not, I appreciate the consistency of it. Jan is saying, you can say a lot of things about the Hobbit movies, but I love every single one of them. Not just because they're truly great movies, but because that was my journey to Middle-earth. Since I was too young with Lord of the Rings, and they sparked my interest in filmmaking more than any other film, with the extras, production videos, and so on. Well, I mean, that's good that if The Hobbit was able to do that for you, Jan, then that's a wonderful thing, because any movie that helps inspire other people to become filmmakers, I think that's the best testament to its success as a movie. And I'm not going to say that the Hobbit movies are bad. Far from it. They are actually quite good movies. I like them a lot. I just they're not my favorites. There are many things that I dislike about them, but there are many things that I like about them. Do I feel that ultimately they come together as a cohesive narrative that helps to tell the story of The Hobbit? I don't think so. I feel that it is too overblown with too many unnecessary subplots, too many unnecessary distractions. Pretty distractions, I'm not going to lie. Some of them are, a lot of these battle scenes are fun, but they're distractions nonetheless. But it has amazing performances. It's got a wonderful cast of characters. It's got beautiful scenery, beautiful designs, great battle scenes in the final movie. It's not without its faults, but it also has a lot going for it. I just feel that together, if you were to watch them back to back to back, it it's not it it takes the focus away from the core of the story. Jan is saying it's still better than 90% of the blockbusters out there, and I completely agree with you there. Like, this is like Transformers 4 has nothing on this. um One of the Ustreamers is saying, if you look at the movies as a separate story from the stories from Tolkien, uh, then you enjoy them more. Um, I and for me, it's not a matter of like comparing the books to the movie. Um, it's a matter of does this movie stay true to the spirit of the books, which I thought Lord of the Rings did in a fantastic way. I thought it was true to the spirit of Tolkien's intent, while transforming it into a completely different medium and doing a good job telling the story. Um, I sort of feel like, because The Hobbit is a very different story, um, what you have here is trying to find some balance between staying true to the spirit of this very different story from Lord of the Rings, while also trying to make it part of the bigger universe from the Lord of the Rings. And I feel like it didn't achieve that balance very effectively, mostly because a lot of the extra stuff I felt didn't go anywhere. It wasn't in service to a greater storyline. It was in service to making this a bigger story in its own right. And what I really felt was that it ultimately distracted. Um, uh, Ava says, I have issues with this, but I still enjoy them um, because it's Middle Earth. And yes, that's true. Uh, Jan is saying, as we talked about the other day, I totally think they should do an animated version of The Hobbit. I think that would be a great way to stay true to the book in a childish kind of way. Well, that was done in 77, the Rankin Bass Hobbit movie, um, which I thought was a very well done, a very well done movie. I thought it was a really good interpretation of Tolkien. Um, uh, I I sort of feel like they could do more to make the different to make all the dwarves distinctive. Um, I thought they could have made Smaug look more intimidating. It's a movie that's very dated, and um, I'm I'm totally okay with a more updated version of an animated Hobbit movie. Um, and maybe that can or should be done in like 10, 15 years after this has died down a little bit. Um, that is that is more like there Jan is talking about something more along the lines of like a Pixar style movie. I think that's a great idea. I think The Hobbit lends itself to that a lot better than trying to make a trilogy that fits into the bigger uh, the that tries to give The Hobbit the same kind of scope that The Lord of the Rings does, or that The Lord of the Rings has. Because The Hobbit is not that story. It never was that story. The Lord of the Rings is epic. It has a very large scope. There are huge stakes. The Hobbit is not that kind of story. It's the story of a hobbit forced from his home to join a group of strangers to steal a mountain from a dragon. Uh, and that's essentially all it is, and that's all it needs to be. Um, so what I'm really interested in seeing is somebody taking all three movies once they're out on a DVD and condensing them and editing them down into a solid 3-4 hour complete Hobbit movie. Uh, so, and you know that that's going to happen, just like the same way somebody made a version of the Phantom Menace with Jar Jar Binks taken out. Uh, Ustreamer 1110 is saying, I love the book when I first read it at 10, but as I got older, it just didn't hold me on rereading like The Lord of the Rings. I still enjoy Lord of the Rings with the same level of satisfaction of her reading. Once I realized that there was a grand world with so much in motion during the Hobbit era, I just couldn't enjoy it without the complexity of the geopolitical element that was happening in Middle Earth. Um, I I can see your point, but at the same time, like, well, I don't. I'm still able to reread The Hobbit and get the same satisfaction out of it that I did when I was a little kid. Um, um, but I mean, I can see your point of wanting to see it in the bigger story that is happening, because I mean, all of this was happening while Sauron was trying to consolidate his power and make his move. Um, but for me, I I enjoy the simple tale of Bilbo Baggins, a tiny a little fellow in a wide world after all, and that's what The Hobbit has always been to me, and um, I would have liked to have seen that on the screen. And again, I can't stress this enough. This is not to say that I didn't enjoy the Hobbit movies, or that I was sitting in my chair squirming at all the changes. I wasn't. I'm much more open to changes than some other people, and I mean, there are some people I've talked to who basically gave up on this trilogy and aren't going to see the Battle of the Five Armies. Um, Ustreamer 4434 saying you really could put it in the scope of the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf pretty much made the Hobbit happen. He was the mover of all this. He wanted to have the dwarves to retake Erebor to thwart Sauron's forces from the north. And that's true. There was like Gandalf's a catalyst or an instigator, as Temple says. And that's true. I mean, there was premeditation in what Gandalf was doing, and Ustreamer 4434 says Dane fought huge battles in the North Front during Lord of the Rings, and all this was precipitated by The Hobbit. And that makes total sense, because even though Dane ultimately does take over as King Under the Mountain, he's also the Lord of the Iron Hills, and so now he has to protect both of these strongholds. Ustreamer 1110 says, I think I could enjoy just the straight narrative too, but I would probably feel the same way you do about this version. I would love it, but would have wanted something different. And that's ultimately where I stand on it. I love these movies. I truly enjoyed them, but to say that they transported me to Middle Earth the same way that the Lord of the Rings did, I honestly can't say that about these movies. And that I feel is the biggest shame. Because there is so much going for these movies. There's so many good things in them. But ultimately it was not as immersive. It didn't tell a story that felt like Tolkien to me. Whereas The Lord of the Rings did. And whether that is just from the fact that they had to make this into a trilogy, so they had to add all this stuff to it, or whether it's from just the way that it was shot. Jan is saying, so your favorite is Unexpected Journey. It seems like that is the most that fits your vision. Well, here's my problem. While it would seem that way, as a movie that I sit down on my own in a theater to enjoy, the one that I got the most satisfaction out of is the Battle of the Five Armies. And Unexpected Journey, I felt, while it was closer to the actual narrative, it also was not paced very well. I felt the Battle of the Five Armies was paced much better, because again, there is not this big there is a balance that needs to be made narratively from what is in the book to what can be shown on screen, because pacing in a book is very different from pacing in a movie. And to give you an example, this is part of my adaptation of The Lord of the Rings that I wrote in the 90s. Now, it seems kind of thin. This is only 95 pages. How far do you think the characters get in this story? They don't even get out of the Shire. This is about an hour and a half of footage. They don't even leave the Shire in this. And it's because of pacing. There was this screenplay is extraordinarily front-loaded with exposition, and I sort of felt that Unexpected Journey suffered from that problem as well. Like in this, there is a full depiction of the Battle of the Last Alliance. There is a full depiction of the riddles in the dark, all in order to establish the story of the ring. And it takes place over the course of about an hour. And I sort of felt like Unexpected Journey suffered from that same problem, that it took us a long time to finally get to the quest. And so, pacing wise, I felt that Unexpected Journey dragged too much. I felt that Desolation of Smaug was very disjointed, and seemed almost to want to jump from one action set piece to the next. And same thing in the Battle of the Five Armies, but I sort of felt like it was more warranted in that because this is the final installment. This is the climax of it. So jumping from one action set piece to the next is a little bit more forgivable in this movie. So ultimately, like, this is I felt like I don't know, like, I need to sit down, and maybe I should just one day sit down and watch all three back to back to back. And I do plan on doing that. I haven't done it yet, and maybe it flows better when you do it that way. Temple is saying, I found it interesting that Battle of the Five Armies had no prologue. And yes, it's the only Middle-earth movie that doesn't have a prologue. Do I think that detracted from it? Not really. Because they chose to have the Desolation of Smaug end on a cliffhanger rather than have the extra 10 minutes to show the death of Smaug and give it a proper climax. So Jan is saying that he actually did do the back-to-back-to-back thing, watching Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smaug before going to see Battle of the Five Armies. And I'd be curious to know how you thought they all flowed together. Temple says, I thought it was a good thing. It made sense. They had to get right into the action quickly after the end of Desolation of Smaug. And we're talking about the fact that Battle of the Five Armies did not have a prologue. And yeah, I didn't feel that it detracted from the movie. It was different, but that's okay. Different is fine. You don't need to be beholden to a specific formula for each movie. But I still don't like that the Desolation of Smaug ended on a cliffhanger when really all we had was maybe another 10-15 minutes to end that story, to end that part of the story. And it would have been much nicer if we had that and given Desolation of Smaug a proper ending. Ustreamer1110 is saying, I don't think it detracted either. One thing I would have liked somewhere in the trilogy was a flashback or prologue establishing Dane prior to his arrival. That would have been nice. Because, yeah, Dane does just sort of come out of nowhere. Jan is saying, I think it's kind of ironic that Unexpected Journey was the longest one and Battle of the Five Armies was the shortest one. You would think it would be the opposite. You would think, but also just going from how much of the book is used in each movie. Unexpected Journey, I think, uses has the biggest chunk of material from the book in it, and then progressively less and less as we go through the trilogy. Temple was asking, was Dane in the Battle of Moria? I don't think he was, but don't quote me on that. And we're talking about the Battle of Moria where Thorin is fighting Azog. And so Ustreamer1110 and 4434 say yes, he was there and he killed Azog. So that's an interesting twist, um, because of course Azog is still alive in this, and yeah, I agree. They could have added Dane to um, the Battle of Moria, if simply just to establish him as a character, because he does sort of appear out of nowhere in the Battle of the Five Armies. Stepped on his neck and lopped his noggin off. Wow, that is a very Dane thing to do. Uh, so this up here. Ava is saying Desolation of Smaug should have ended with Smaug rotting at the bottom of the lake. That scene from The Hobbit book was one of my favorites. It felt really mystic and magical to me. I agree. Like I really do hope that in the extended edition we at least have that moment of Bilbo walking past the Long Lake and seeing Smaug's corpse in the ruins of Lake Town. I think that would be a really nice visual. And interesting. So Ustreamer 4434 is saying the way Dane killed Azog by stepping on his neck and chopping off his head is how he got the nickname Ironfoot. So technically, since Azog wasn't killed in the Battle of Moria in the movies, Dane should not have had that nickname. So there's a little bit of a narrative inconsistency there. And a lot of people got nicknames out of that battle, because that's how Thorin got Oakenshield. That's how Dane got Ironfoot. I really need to read up on the Battle of Moria. Well, the way you guys are describing it, it sounds way more interesting than it was in the movie. And again, I sort of feel like all this stuff would have played really well into Thorin's backstory, just to sort of show like the desperation he had, the desperation that he felt in trying to reestablish Erebor, because this is pretty much all he has left. And sort of like lumping him in with that, piling all this tragedy onto him, like Azog kills his father. He doesn't get the satisfaction of killing Azog. Dane gets that. There could be some nice tension between them. But instead Azog is alive, and he's chasing them across Middle Earth. And again, I sort of feel like this is all a distraction, and I really would have liked to have seen like more desperation on Thorin's part. And again, that becomes established when you show how much he's lost, which they do in the movies. I won't say that they don't do that. But like what Ustreamer 4434 is pointing out, there was a lot more that he lost that we don't see. And Aravandi is saying Manu Bennett's name for the white warg that Azog was riding is Daisy, the white warg. Well, that's just the the least intimidating name of a warg ever. And I would like to point out aesthetically, I thought the wargs in The Hobbit looked much better than the wargs in The Lord of the Rings. Again, that's just my opinion. I think there are people who would probably go a different way, or who don't like either, and that's fine. Me personally, I like the way the wargs looked in this better than Lord of the Rings. They look kind of like giant groundhogs in Lord of the Rings. But yeah, that there isn't too much I can think of to talk about. Let's see. Simply Smog is saying Azog was beautiful. I thought he was a great design. I agree and disagree with Azog, because there was a Freudian typo there. Eravandi, I think, typed the Hobbit warts instead of the Hobbit wargs, and that's a pretty funny typo. So yeah, I have problems with Azog because those who may or may not know, there was actually a practical orc character who I think might have been Bolg, but was supposed to be both the character that Azog and Bolg quickly. He was supposed to be what Azog and Bolg ultimately were. He was supposed to be this single-minded orc that was going after Thorin, and it was a practical character. It was a guy in costume, in makeup, and there are pictures of him on the internet if you can find them, and he looked amazing. He looked intimidating as all hell, and he looked scary. So to see that, and then to see what we ultimately got with Azog and Bolg, is sort of a disappointment. Ustreamer1110 says, wasn't he Gandalf's jailer in the Dol Guldur scene? You know, I thought the same thing. He looked kind of like him, but we don't really get a good shot of him. We just get like a little bit of a close-up of his face. And yeah, I did think that might have been that character. Yeah, so that's what we were talking about. Yana saying, okay, so that was him. Yana saying that was him. Okay, and I thought that was, and he looked cool. But knowing that was supposed to be the big character is disappointing. Because I thought that he was a cool character. He was a cool looking character. And he was supposed to have a much bigger role. There isn't too much left for me to talk about. We kind of have gone over everything. So this is, or everything I can think of. Final thoughts on the Hobbit trilogy as movies. I thought they were good. As a whole, as an interpretation of Tolkien, I thought they were much more. I thought they were disappointing. I thought that this was. They're certainly better than a lot of the blockbusters that are out there, as Jan pointed out. Simply Smaug is asking 1 to 10 rating for Battle of the Five Armies. I gave it last week, and I'm sticking by it. Around an 8.5 is what I would give it. It's it's a good movie. It's got a lot of good battles, a lot of good stuff in there, but it also has a lot of distractions. And but the Hobbit trilogy as a whole, if I were to give it um, if I were to give the Hobbit trilogy as a whole a rating from 1 to 10, I'd probably put it around the 5 to 6 range. Um, and and again, that could be subject to a change because I haven't watched these back to back to back. They might flow together very well. Um, I Temple is saying on the school grading system, I give the trilogy a B, maybe a B plus. For me right now, I'd probably give it about a C. Um, Ava is saying I'm really looking forward to the Battle of the Five Armies extended edition, and so am I for sure. I really want to see some stuff added to this because this movie did seem to suffer from stuff that was clearly taken out. Um, but this is as a as essentially a farewell to at least this this cinematic version of Middle Earth. This is the farewell movie for that. I thought as a send off to that, this did a very good job. I left the theater satisfied, and that that's all for good. That's all for the good. Um, Jan says Battle of the Five Armies flows much better when you see it the second and third time, and I absolutely agree with that. I've seen it 3 times, and it does flow much better the second and even the third time. Um, I'm I'm sad that this is going to be the last time that we see a new Middle Earth movie um, for probably quite a while. Um, for those of you who may or may not know Tolkien's other works, will probably not go into the public domain until about 2043, according to the math that I've done. Um, and that's whether or not Christopher Tolkien is considered an author rather than an editor on stuff like the Silmarillion or the history of Middle Earth. If that's the case, then we have a much longer wait. But the Tolkien estate has said there is not going to be any adaptations of anything other than The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings as long as they have any say about it, and they're sticking to that. And I admire that. I admire that they are not caving to what I'm sure is a huge amount of pressure from studios to say, let us use this stuff so that we can keep this Middle Earth franchise going. Um, but ultimately, that's not going to happen. At least not for the near future. The more distant future, perhaps. We may even have time to see a reboot at some point in 20 years or so. But for now, this is what we have. And, I have to say, I'm happy that we have them. Before Peter Jackson made these movies, we had some pretty lackluster animated movies as our only other interpretations of Tolkien. We had the Rankin Bass Hobbit. We had the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, and then we had the Rankin Bass Return of the King movie, which all of them are very dated and very cheesy, and so the fact that we were able to get these 6 movies and see Middle Earth realized the way that it was is is something I never thought I would see. It's something I hope that as a child I would see one day, and now we have. And I have to say it was greatly satisfying. It's a fantastic journey that we've been on. Um, from Fellowship of the Ring all the way up to today, seeing Middle Earth realized on film this way has been an absolute joy. And I think even the more stoic Tolkien fans who have not been happy with the interpretations have to. I feel that many of them also do concede that visually it looks amazing. Um, Ava is saying, "I'm so inspired by all the concept art from the Middle Earth movies. I'm grateful for that." And and as well you should be. These are fantastic. It's fantastic concept art, um, and and what you've taken away from this, Ava, the skills that you've brought to your own art because of this is tremendous. Again, I can't stress this enough. I'm gonna post it again on our Facebook page and make sure that it stays up for a while. Um, the new piece of I hesitate to call it fan art because it feels like more than that. But it's essentially some fan art that Ava made for the book club today. I'm going to put that up on the Facebook page again to make sure that everybody can see it because it really is beautiful, and Ava is a fantastic talent, and I'm so grateful that um, Tolkien and Middle Earth and these movies have inspired so much talent in so many people. And it's hard to get angry at a movie series that does that much good. Um, whether or not you like, um, whether or not you like um, the movie's interpretation of Tolkien, they've done so much. They've brought together this amazing community of fans. Uh, they've they've put this amazing country, New Zealand, on the world stage in a way that it's never been before. It's brought Tolkien into the zeitgeist, into popular culture in a way that he's never been before. Um, it's inspired so many filmmakers and so many artists. Jan is in film school now because of the Hobbit movies, um, and it's it inspired me to learn how to write screenplays uh, and focus my own writing because I wanted to see a movie of The Lord of the Rings when I read the book when I was 16 years old. Um, these are and Simply Smaug says they made millions of dollars. Actually, they made billions of dollars, and that's true. It's a very profitable franchise as well. But aside from that, it's done so much to just to inspire so many people. And so, like, regardless of whether or not I agreed with directorial or interpretive decisions in these movies, I'm glad they exist. And I feel like there's very little more that can be said that to there's very little more that can be said to the credit of a movie that inspires that much in people. Um, and so it's sad that this is that this has come to an end. That this version of Tolkien on the big screen has come to an end. But it's something we can always go back and watch again, and I know that I will. I know that I will watch and rewatch these movies for the rest of my life, as I will read and reread The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings for the rest of my life. Um, and some people are some people are crying now, or saying they're crying, and Aravandi's saying, but not all tears are an evil. And that's true. And and yeah, part of the tears that I shed when I saw Battle of the Five Armies was for knowing that knowing that this was the end of it. And it's been a good journey. It's it's been an inspiring and imaginative and wonderful journey through fandom, seeing all these people come to us, to the OneRing.net, um, and to all the other communities out there, and we've established really strong friendships over the years, and and like I said, with any with any movie, that whether or not you question how well it executed what the filmmaker's intent was, um, you, it's hard to hate a movie or a movie series that does that much good. And that's why ultimately I'm glad these movies exist, and I'm glad to have seen them, and I will see them over and over again. And I, I'm going to keep reading everything Tolkien I can get my hands on, and I've read plenty already, and there's still more that I have to read. Um, and um, and I'm going to continue writing, and I'm going to continue doing the book club, because uh, we're fans of Tolkien, but we're fans of so many other books. Um, and so I love that we can explore all of that, and the fact that this community exists is wonderful. And so, oh my God, Ervandi saying there is a Thranduil appreciation thread that is 29 pages long. Uh, there's a lot of Thranduil appreciation out there, but okay, before I get too much mushier or gushier about this, I'm gonna bring this to a close and just say that I'm very happy that this movie exists, that these movies exist. I enjoyed them. I have issues with them, but I enjoyed them. Um, and so that's my ultimate final thought on the Hobbit trilogy. I liked it. Did I think it was a great interpretation of Tolkien? Probably not, but I still liked it. And and that's that's okay. And I hope you liked it too, and I hope you like this episode. I hope you like this review. Big conversations going on here. And so so thank you all for joining in. I will see you all next week, which will where we will be discussing our book of the month, The Martian by Andy Weir. Again, be sure to go to Indiegogo and contribute a little to our party, or buy tickets if you haven't already. The party happens in February, February 21st, and the Indiegogo campaign ends on December 31st. So you've got about 10 more days. And so I will see you all next week. Thank you again for everybody who participated in this. I will see you all next week, and never stop reading.